Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real. I'm Shannon. I'm starting this episode with a personal message in advance, just because I want to issue a trigger warning that in this episode, I am interviewing Branden Densmore, and there is discussion about traumatic abuse. There are no details mentioned, but I understand that this may be sensitive for some viewers, so just be aware as you go into this and decide for yourself whether that's something that you're comfortable viewing or not. Thank you so much. And now I am going to share the interview in which Branden Densmore shares the details of his near-death experience, and we talk about forgiveness. Today, I have with me Branden Densmore, and Branden is a spiritual coach. He is the CEO of Gathered Minds Media. And I have him here because Branden, Branden is a near-death experiencer, and obviously in his work, he's learned a lot through this near-death experience and through his work. Welcome, Branden. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Shannon, thanks for having me on the show.
You are so welcome. It is my absolute pleasure. First of all, I'd like just a quick little intro about what it is that you do as a spiritual coach. I know that you're a certified spiritual mindset coach. What is that? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a certified spiritual mindset coach. That's part of what I do. The other part of it is a business consultant. So I've been in business for a few years now, and I just help people solve their technical issues around their business. So that's the other half. But the spiritual mindset coaching is more about like clarifying your life purpose. And that can also be linked to starting a business or growing and expanding a business. I work with heart-centered spiritual people, and helping them get their voice out there, helping them, establish a social media presence and work on other life challenges that can get in the way of really kind of living your destiny and your purpose.
Awesome. Sounds like something I could use. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. I'd love to kind of know a little bit about your childhood, your background, whatever you're comfortable sharing about your previous spiritual experiences or lack thereof or beliefs, and then we'll go from there, because I like to know about you, the person, because I think that who you are really informs your experience in a near-death experience or other spiritually transformative experience.
Okay. So lately I've been just kind of going through the near-death experience. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of like kind of cool and interesting beliefs that we can talk about that I had. But I kind of rebelled against that when I was 15, and then really kind of got out of that religion when I was in my early 20s. But it really kind of shaped who I am and the direction that I'm going. So I'm grateful for that. So when I was 8 years old, I was sexually molested. And that was kind of like the first crack in the armor, so to speak. Being a Jehovah's Witness, I was different in school. Like we wouldn't stand up and salute the flag, didn't celebrate any holidays, didn't participate in any extracurricular activities. That kind of set me apart as a different kind of person. I didn't fit into the crowd. And in retrospect, I'm thankful for that, because I don't want to be normal, because normal is kind of boring in a way, But anyways, so I was sexually molested at 8 years old, went to school, hated it, hated school, was made fun of, picked on, bullied, didn't get along with the teachers. And I had one near-death experience when I was 21 years old. So I got into a pretty bad fight and was kicked in the head multiple times by steel-toed boots. And I went to the doctor the next day after it happened, and he said that if 3 more pounds of pressure had been put on that last kick, it would have gone into my brain. So, and I have permanent nerve damage from that fight. But what I experienced during that near-death experience was just total blackness, like the absence of nothing, like total blackout. And then after that is when I really started questioning things about who am I, where am I going. I had a lot of, self-esteem issues, probably going back to the sexual abuse and also being made fun of at school. But after that near-death experience, I started questioning everything. I believed I was stupid and that I wasn't going to go anywhere. I wasn't going to amount to anything in life. And that near-death experience really made me kind of question those beliefs. And I started exploring spirituality at that point. But I discovered that I had a love of learning. So I forgot to mention, I dropped out of school in the 9th grade and went to work at a few jobs. But then after that near-death experience, I started reading everything I could about self-development, spirituality, that kind of thing, and discovered that I loved it. I loved learning new things and applying those things and conducting experiments to see how these things would work and to actually apply the knowledge that I was learning. So I went back to school, got a GED, and then went into a community college and graduated there from with an associate's degree. So during the time that I was at the community college, I was introduced to a program called Exploring Transfer. It's a program administered through the community colleges to introduce students to what it's like to go to an Ivy League institution. So I went to an Ivy League institution for 6 weeks at Vassar College in New York, and I took 2 classes during that 6-week period, 2 full Vassar courses, and studied, and ended up getting a 4.0 GPA. Not bad for a high school dropout. Mm-hmm. And so after that, I applied to Vassar to become a full-time student and received a full scholarship, where I went for 4 years and earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy. But what people didn't know during this whole time was that I was addicted to opiates. So back when I was a teenager in school, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease and sacroiliac spondylitis. So Crohn's disease is an inflammatory disease of the bowel, and arthritis, it's sacroiliac spondylitis. It's like arthritis of the low spine. But back then, I think it was actually juvenile rheumatoid arthritis is what I had then, and it transformed into sacroiliac spondylitis, but whatever. So I had pain throughout my entire body, inflammation in all my joints. And I was prescribed opiates at age 15. So started doing those, and what I realized is that it treated my physical pain, but also my emotional pain. So I had a lot of resentments toward people and a lot of fear and self-confidence issues and things that were very uncomfortable. And I would take this medication and it would dull that out and it would make me feel good. So in 2014, after I graduated from Vassar, again, what people didn't know is that I was addicted to these opiate substances during this whole time period. So I graduate from Vassar, I'm back home, I'm in my mom's apartment, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to come to bring me some heroin, which I was also introduced to at Vassar. But that's another story. I won't go there. Let's just get through this. So I was in withdrawals for days. I'm in my mom's apartment. I'm waiting for the guy to show up. Is he ever going to get here? Is he ever going to get here? I'm so uncomfortable. All of the voices inside of my mind, all of the self-confidence issues, all of the resentments, all of these different things are just screaming at me at the top of their lungs. And I am so uncomfortable. Is this guy ever going to show up? Like, I can't take this anymore. Finally, he gets there. I'm like, oh, finally. And he brings me the stuff and I do some of it. Oh, and I can just relax, right? Like finally the nightmare is over. Like finally I can just think straight and feel good and, kind of collect myself after 3 days of being in this hellish withdrawal. So, but that didn't last long because I realized I was dying and I had overdosed. So I don't know if it was fentanyl, which people are putting in the heroin, or if it was just a really potent batch. But, anyways, I found myself standing beside my body and I was looking at myself and wondering what had the point of my life been, anyways. Like, why was I here? Why did I go through this whole educational journey? And what had the point of my life been? And then, as I'm thinking this, I've become aware of a presence in the room. And I don't know what the presence was. I couldn't see any kind of like a spirit. I couldn't see anything at all, but I just felt that somebody was there, like present with me. And then I was kind of transported into like another reality. So I don't know if like it was the future that I was shown, or if it was something like the holodeck from Star Trek. I don't know how many people out there have seen Star Trek that watch the show, but the holodeck can like transport you to any reality that you want. You just say, okay, I want to be on the moon, put me on the surface of the moon, and then your entire surroundings change. It's like a computer program, like a hologram. But that's what it was like. It was like a holodeck. And I was shown all of the people that would be affected by my death. So all of the friends and family who were affected. And then in particular, I remember my mother finding my dead body on her couch. And like I was all discolored and had pus running out of my mouth. And there I was, her little baby. And she said, "My baby, my little baby boy, my baby." And that like crushed me because I knew that like I was responsible, and like she found my dead body and she had all of these tender memories of raising me as a child and bringing me up and the first foods, all of these tender memories, and it ended this way. Then I was shown all of the people that I would never meet, all of the experiences that I was supposed to have while I was here on the planet, and then all of the people that I was going to help, or that I should have helped, or I was supposed to help. And then everything changed, and I'm back in the room, and I'm like pleading to give me another chance. Like, I will do anything I have to do to overcome this addiction so that this doesn't happen. I can't let this happen. Please, please, please. And I heard a voice, and it was a very matter-of-fact voice, and it said, "Now your life is over and you wasted it." And then that's when I was like terrified. And I just begged and begged and begged to be able to live. And then all of a sudden I'm back in my body, gasping for breath.
And at what point did you I actually want to know a funny thing, like what happened then? What did you do? Did you speak to your mother? Was your mother there? How did you process what had just happened to you?
Um, I immediately called crisis and um, told a little fib. I told a fib. I said, I'm suicidal, because I knew that they weren't going to like take me into a rehab unless I was suicidal.
Right.
So I ended up going to a 7-day detox at a hospital and had to learn how to tie my shoelaces again. It was that bad. Like, my brain was just totally dependent on this medication. So went to a 7-day detox, and then that's when the real journey began, of spiritual transformation and really kind of getting to the root of why this happened and how do I fix it, and moving into the future so that I can live with purpose and some tranquility and peace of mind, so that I can put this to work in helping the world.
That's really fascinating to me in that I know so many addicts, it just takes such a long time to get there. That you know this isn't the way that your life should go, but then you just keep falling into a spiral and then you just keep doing it again and there's shame and guilt and all that stuff. And it's amazing to me that you just immediately got on the phone and asked for help. I think that's so profound, and that the fact that you went there and there was, would you say there was any resistance, or was there just no resistance?
No resistance
Yeah,
at
that's
that point.
incredible. That's really, really interesting to me. Um, I have so many questions. I'm just trying to formulate one to kind of separate one from the rest.
You're speechless.
Yeah, I am. I'm very speechless. There is something that we talked about just before the cameras were rolling, that I'd asked you if there was sort of a topic that you wanted to dive into, and you had immediately, without hesitation, talked about forgiveness.
Hmm.
And I know there are other insights that have come from this, but I think this is, I want to delve into this now because when you describe your childhood, your upbringing, there, I don't know, I don't want to assume there's religious trauma, but perhaps you'll have to speak to that. And abuse, of course, and being picked on and being literally physically uh, injured and could have actually died at that time. Start wherever you'd like to, but I think it's really, I want to talk about the importance of forgiveness, for one thing, in our growth and our healing, but also anything that comes to mind right off the bat. I'm all ears.
Okay. So I've been thinking about forgiveness a lot lately. And it seems in retrospect to be something that is extremely powerful for transforming your life. So it's like you might have had things that have happened in the past, and when you think about those things, you'll have a feeling come up. So you might call that resentment, right? So something happens to you in the past, you think about it, and then you have a feeling that occurs, and it's resentment. So forgiveness is like the antidote to resentment, right? But why is this important? It's like the tip of, I don't know if you've heard of like the iceberg analogy in psychology, but a lot of people think that resentment doesn't really affect them. Um, and yeah, big deal. Like I think about something that happened to me a long time ago, and I have a little bit of resentment, a feeling of anger or hate that comes up, and I can just brush that off and go about my life, right? But it has so many effects on people that without our even realizing it, it's like the tip of an iceberg, right? Is our normal conscious mind, but underneath that is the subconscious, and that's where resentment lives. It's like the monster in the basement. So it lives under the surface, and it keeps us locked into a reality that we're used to living in, right? But if we want to really transform our lives and enter a new existence, so you can practice forgiveness, which puts you into an alternate timeline. Like it's that powerful. It's as if the past never happened the way that you imagined it. So if you can really grasp forgiveness, all of a sudden reality changes. And I'm not talking like metaphorically. I'm talking that you're now on another timeline. You're in a totally different reality, and you're no longer locked into the old patterns. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I am, as if you've been around and listened to this podcast audience, I am a 12-step. I've been in recovery for sex and love addiction myself. And I always say that the fourth step, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's really breaking down all of your resentments for a reason, and sort of setting them free. And that was the one where my life changed. That was the one that took the longest. And my sponsor had said, write down everything. And I thought, well, I'm a people pleaser. I'm like always nice. I don't feel angry. I have trouble with processing anger. She said, but there are things, she's like, write down your mom and dad. I'm like, I don't resent them. They were great. Like, my parents are wonderful. She said, no parent's perfect. You're not attacking them. You're just getting out anything that might be there. Just any little thing, just to make sure it's just gone, or that it's not gone, sorry, that it's addressed, confronted, not that you want it gone, you just want to acknowledge it. And the purpose of that is to then say, okay, well, what obviously something like abuse as a child, you did not have a part in that. So it's addressing your part. So there are things where if you're victimized, you don't own that, but you can say this really formed my negative core belief about myself. And then we want to work to take that negative core belief and reverse it. So forgiveness is sort of wrapped up in that, and just sort of acknowledging, well, what was my part in that? And saying, and in your case, there was no part. You were a child, you were abused. And I actually want to ask you, so for me, that was what really did helped with a lot of my healing. But for you, I want to ask, how do you forgive something as serious as traumatic abuse,
Hmm.
as somebody literally attacking you and hurting you to such a degree that you have permanent injuries? What can we do to work on forgiveness?
Great question. So I'm also went through the 12 steps, and I'll just touch on like what my sponsor told me about the sexual molestation. Um, so the thing is like I had held on to that resentment for, I haven't calculated how many years it was, but over 20 years. And I was no longer that little child, right? So something happened to that little child, which formed the resentment. But I was no longer that little child. You know what I mean? Like it had been 20 years, and I was still holding on to this thing. And what my sponsor, so I told him, yeah, I was sexually molested and I resent the person who did it. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry that happened to you as a little child. That should not have ever happened, and that's just a terrible thing to go through." I said, "Okay, thank you." And then he said, "So here it is, how many years after, and you're feeling bad about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's been a long time." He said, "Did you ever consider that maybe he had been sexually molested?" I was like, "No." So, do you realize that like people who sexually molest other people were probably molested themselves, and that's where they learned it? I said, "No, I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
In 20 plus years, I'd never really thought about that." He said, "Don't you think it's a little self-centered that you're 20 years holding on to a resentment and you never once thought of where the other person might be coming from?" I said, "Self-centered? What do you mean self-centered?" "Because it's like you are the victim. Damn it. This happened to me, and I'm angry about it, and I'm going to continue being angry about it because damn it, that person sexually molested me, right? But that is a little bit self-centered." He's like, "Step out of yourself for a minute, and you know that the resentment is hurting you, right? So step out of yourself for just a minute and maybe look at it from his point of view, that maybe he had been sexually molested, and He was a baby once. What do you think might have happened to him? And it was kind of, a bitter pill,
Yeah,
like a sugar coated bitter pill to swallow. Does that at all answer your question?
very much. And I that's it was very bold of your sponsor to say that to you, and it's something I think about that I don't usually say out loud because I do think about that a lot because it hasn't happened to me. I do have this sort of strange underlying empathy for people that do horrible things to people. I mean, it's not, it depends on what it is, but there's an empathy for the child they were. And I'll just say I've said that before because there's someone in my family who's long deceased, but who who did that to his family. And all I could think was, I know his background, and I thought, that and someone who was abused by him said to me, he I guess revealed that that had happened to him. And I thought and she agreed with me, and she's the victim. And I just said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And then I said, "And, because we're family, I could say this to her, but I said, I just feel for the little boy that he was when that happened. He turned out to be an abusive alcoholic, died on
Mm.
the streets, but there's always that thing in my heart." Um, and he's come through in readings for me too. And, people in my family are like, "I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to hear about him. He's a bad, bad person." And I'm like, I know, but all I can think of is that little child that he was that was hurt. And, but when it happens to you, that's not your go-to. That's not the first thing you would say. And I'm glad that you were able to appreciate what your sponsor said to you. I would never have I would be too, I would never say that to somebody because I'd be afraid that that's really, like I said, very bold. But I appreciate that so much. And the people that hurt you, anyone who can beat somebody, especially
Hmm.
somebody who's done nothing to deserve it.
Yep.
It's just, in fact, I just want to sort of say that one time we used to drive for Lyft, and one night, this is one of the reasons I never drove for Lyft again. Um, I picked a guy up who told me it was like midnight, 1 in the morning. I'm alone in the car with him. He tells me that he likes to hurt women. He tells me that he is an abuser, that he likes to see people hurt, not just women, but people. And of course, I had no choice but I had nowhere to run. So I
And
just
what is Lyft?
well, Lyft is like Uber.
Okay.
It's like rideshare driving. So I pick up this guy on my way home. I'm like, I'll pick up one last passenger. And he turns out to be this young guy. And I just said, well, I can't go anywhere. I may as well just interview him, right? Ask him what it's like to be a sociopath, And I said to him, do you think this is nature? Do you think this is an inherited trait? Was this a trauma-based thing that happened to you? I just tried to stay calm, and I
Yeah.
just was asking him questions. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, well, my dad, I think, is a sociopath. And, I don't know what it is. I just really like to hurt people. And it was interesting because I just asked him about his childhood. I was like, what happened? Was there, and he said, yes, there was trauma. And I thought, I'm not going to say I felt like sorry for him exactly. And I was just so lucky that he said, you're a good person. And I'd never want to see something like that happen to you. And that was creepy. And he didn't leave my car when I pulled over. He just talked to me for a while. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to befriend him and just not, but it was interesting looking back that I had that opportunity to talk to a sociopath
Mm.
and to say, and a sociopath, a little bit different because that's also usually a brain structure thing. And it's not so much, oh, this poor guy. But it was really interesting to say he was abused by his father. And that's how his cells formed. They form around the
Mm.
trauma. So,
Yep.
it's really
Empathy.
interesting. Empathy. It's just, it's what I was trying to say, this took way too long. I'm sorry, audience. Is that I had a migraine last night. So my brain is moving very slowly today. Um, but somebody who could hurt you that badly must have been hurt themselves.
Mm.
That was my
Yeah.
long, long, long way of getting there.
Yeah. And yeah, that makes total sense. And it's like in AA. when they say when a person offends, you say to yourself, this is a sick person. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like the empathy aspect. Looking at humans, can be frail. Um, and we have a lot of violence in our species. Um, there's an animal inside of us. There's genetic programming. Um, that makes it a little bit more understandable. You look at the atrocities of the world. You've got slavery, you've got war, you've got rape, put your hand in the hat and pick it out. I mean, there's so many dark things that happen in this world. There are wonderful things that happen in this world too, but it makes it a little bit more understandable. But it's hard to overcome resentment because it happened to you. With myself, I needed a solution, like to the resentment issue, to the fear issue, to the low self-esteem, because I wasn't going to make it. Like I was going to pass away and go back to the drugs. So I needed to figure out a way to live without substances. I had to find a solution to the resentment problem. So that made it a little bit easier for me to kind of step to the side and say, okay, I'm going to listen to what my sponsor is telling me and actually experiment with it and see how far it can take me. And let me say that my life improved 100% just from, like you said, the fourth step with forgiveness. Like I went from, being addicted to heroin, living in a crappy apartment with no money in the bank and lonely, no self-esteem, to being a business owner, owning my own house, owning my own car, getting married to a beautiful, wonderful woman, having a son. And I would have never have made it this far without forgiveness. It's so important to be able to leave the past behind and to get to a point where if you look back on the things that happened to you, you actually appreciate them. Because if I hadn't been sexually molested, I wouldn't be the Branden Densmore that I am. It doesn't mean that that I'm condoning sexual abuse. It doesn't mean that I have to have people who sexually abuse other people in my life. But I don't have to be in emotional turmoil over it.
Yeah. I also think about addicts. A lot of times we see people on the street, and I just did 2 nights ago, and I was just watching this woman. I just parked next to a woman who was passed out in her car. She was living in her car, and she was passed out, and her dog was in there, and that's why I noticed. It just and you could look at that person and say, why doesn't she that she's got a dog to take care of? Why is she? Because my first thought was just, "Oh, that dog needs to be taken care of." Like, I thought, I wish I could do something, but the next thought is, what is it that led this woman to this place? She was probably sexually abused. She probably, grew up in poverty. Her parents were probably addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this feeling of just trying to be compassionate and understanding for these people that we see on the streets and discard, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, okay, they're just losers, or they're these dregs of society. No, they're people who've been abused, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've talked to maybe one person who was like, "Well, I was an addict just because I tried drugs and really liked it. And other than that, my life was fine. It's just my body just got addicted to it." But there's look at all the people on the streets. Every one of them has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also always said, when it comes to abuse, the understanding, and people have taken this sort of the wrong way. I mean, some people don't like to hear it, but I said it's not. When I say, "Oh, this abuser must have gone through this," they're like, "Why are you empathizing with the abuser?" And I've said, "It's not, I'm not excusing them. It's just an explanation. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation." Because we
Mm-hmm.
all want to understand, how could you do this to somebody?
Mhm.
I started out as a criminal justice major, and one of the guys, the guy who worked closely with Jeffrey Dahmer, um, I forget who he was. It was a very long time ago, but he was telling us how he would interview Jeffrey Dahmer, and Jeffrey Dahmer was like, "I don't want to be like this." He said, "Please kill me," because he said, "I can't stop doing this. I'm mentally ill." And he felt bad. Like, he felt
Mm.
like you would never think he wasn't, like, evil. He was very mentally ill, and he was like, "It's this compulsion I can't stop." He said, "Please take me out because I don't wanna hurt anybody else." So, no, I'm not saying like, "Oh, just forgive people that," but it's understanding I can imagine would help. I still see how hard it is. I still see
Mhm.
how hard it is if it happens to you
Yeah.
because but how and that's I guess my next question is, how do you heal yourself within that? Because yes, you can understand this person was very badly abused.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that, I was very terrified. I was,
Mhm.
traumatized and whatever. How do you heal that part of yourself?
Mm. Good question. Uh, there's probably lots of ways to do it, and I'm not really an expert. Like I'm not, um, a counselor or a medical doctor or anything. Um, but it's like it. You have to realize the importance of it, because if you don't realize the importance of it, what's the sense in even doing it, right?
Mhm.
So, but I mean, there's so um, part of it is seeing them as a human, so that they're, a frail, imperfect human that may have been abused themselves. And we're a product of, millions of years of evolution. Like I see humans as, we're really kind of apes. And if you look at the ape kingdom, like there is domestic violence in the ape world. There is sexual abuse in the ape world. There is war in the ape world. So we have these instincts, and some of them are pretty dark and violent, but we're trying to evolve. And I think that this kind of an evolutionary type pattern has happened in other places in the universe, that there are, beings, extraterrestrials that have gone through these kind of upheavals and evolutionary process, but we just need to be aware of where we've come from. Like it's understandable. Um, Another thing is that if we're resentful, our energy is being zapped. Like we're still wrapped up in what happened all those years ago. And for me, it was like I was an angry person. I had adopted an angry lifestyle. So someone cuts me off in traffic and I get ripped, right? But it's because there's this unresolved anger just boiling under the surface for what happened all those years in the past. I didn't know that that guy that just cut me off in traffic, I get really mad. I thought it was because that guy cut me off in traffic. No, it's because I have this rage inside of me from what happened 20 years ago, right? So it's important to take that energy back, all of our energy. And I had 20, 30 resentments for different things that happened. So my energy was like way in the past, spread out, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move. I couldn't move into a future that I wanted to move into. All I could do was take a substance to try to deal with the pain.
Yeah, and that's what substances or whatever, sex, gambling, that's what it is. It's covering up those negative feelings we don't wanna feel and masking them and escaping from them instead of confronting them. Therefore, we are resentful, and that comes out in so many other ways. If it's historical, it's if it's hysterical, it's historical, is one of my favorite quotes, which my I got that from my sponsor.
But how do we solve the
Yeah,
resentment issue?
how?
How did you do it?
Through that's such a good question. It's through integrity, being of service. It's actually what the 12 st I think why the 12-step program works. It's self-compassion, which you learn by looking at your patterns and where they come from and
Mm,
understanding yourself better. But then it's the self-esteem you gain from rigorous honesty, integrity, being of service, being supported by other people, being in a community, and just feeling seen and heard and seeing and hearing other people, connection. And of course, my trauma, this was mostly in my own head. It was mostly from, being teased as a kid, like being made fun of as a kid or I fortunately had a very loving family and I fortunately did not suffer any kind of abuse. But you would think my brain thought that was telling me that I had for I want to say extremity, that's not the right word, but the extreme nature of my emotions would lead you to believe that I had been through even one of my therapists said to me, "Have were you sexually abused?" Because I had all the sort of symptoms of a sex abuse survivor.
mhm,
And, but I think it is a lot about that, and even as I'm asking you that, how do you forgive someone that did something like that to you?
mm,
Um, because I even just thinking about what happened to you, I get angry, and
yeah,
I get angry for you, and I
mhm.
think, I forgive that?" And
Would you
no,
be
yeah.
would you be angry so the thought goes to, so the guy sexually molested me, right? And he was, I think, 16 and I was 8. So what an asshole, right?
Mhm.
But do you still, like, let's imagine him when he was 8,
Yeah.
being sexually molested
Yep.
and couldn't do anything about it. Do we still think of him as what an asshole, right?
No.
No. So that's part of it. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Um, but another part is, so what is forgiveness? It's like, when someone makes a mistake, you see through the mistake. Like, you don't hold on to it and condemn the person. Um, you don't condemn them. You
Mhm.
just you see through their mistake and past their mistake as if it never even happened.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you too, what was it for you that helped you to heal in the way that you're just not holding that anger in your body?
Mm. It took a lot of, like, meditation and prayer,
I was gonna say that too, actually, yeah.
and just being aware of the feelings. And then I had so many resentments that I wrote lists. Like, I had my girlfriends on one day.
Mhm.
Like, on Friday was the day that I would think about the resentments I had toward past relationships. Like, every Friday, I would do that for months and months and months, if not years. And then, and it was just a constant thing. Like, here, the next day is friendships. How did my friends, what did they do to me? Okay, the school people, what did they do to me? And what are the organizations that I'm resentful at?
Mhm.
And then just looking at it from the perspective of, this is a sick person, these are sick people. Maybe sick is the wrong word, but they are human beings that are limited in, with the whole evolutionary thing, and we're kind of ape type creatures, and you can see it in nature, these things happening. Nature is kind of a violent place sometimes. That makes it more understandable, but
Right.
also realizing how it affects me. I don't want to live as an angry person. So I've got to let this go.
Yeah.
How am I going to do it? I'm going to forgive the person. I'm going to say, um, that this happened, and I release you from it. I
Mhm.
release you from the burden of, you molested me. I release you from that,
Yeah. And
and I release myself as well from it.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'll let you get back to your baby, but I do have sort of this my final questions, I think, is that how did what have you learned specifically from your near-death experience, just about the nature of, I guess, why we're here, but also how did that experience, apart from the obvious, which was that you had basically a Clancy angel showing you, what would have happened if you left. Um, how did the whatever the emotions, the insights that you gleaned from the near-death experience help in your healing specifically?
Mm, well, I used to believe that I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, so they don't really believe that when a person dies, like their soul lives on. Um, they have a similar kind of belief about like when somebody dies, they'll exist in God's memory
Mhm.
and they'll be resurrected someday. But just knowing that that there's a me that exists beyond this physical 3D reality that we experience every day has helped take the fear out of a lot of life. Um, but really, it was kind of like a kick in the butt for me. It was like, wake up, Brandon. Uh, you're here for a reason, and you need to heal your past, and so that you can create a new future. Because there is a plan. That was another part, that there's a plan to everything that's happening, even when it seems dark and terrible. Um, that everything is exists for a reason, even if we can't understand it.
Yeah, I would agree. That's what this knowledge and understanding has done for me too, and makes it a lot easier to deal with life's challenges and tragedies and
Mm,
pain. To understand that, I think before I was spiritual, you'd hear people say, everything happens for a reason. And people don't
right.
like that either because that's very minimizing.
Mm,
And I would never say that to someone who's going through the worst thing imaginable,
no.
or who's in any kind of pain. It's
Yeah.
happening for a reason. That's just so
Right.
insensitive.
Mm-hmm.
But the knowledge for me that it is happening for a reason helps me
Mm-hmm.
sort of process and make sense of it. Understanding that once we cross over, we'll understand it fully and we'll
Mm-hmm.
see why our souls chose this path and what we were to learn from it.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate your perspective on that. Is there anything just in general I would like to ask you? What is it that you want people to know?
Well, when you were speaking, I just want to throw this out there,
Please.
Shannon, that like with the minimizing part,
Yeah.
um, that there's a difference between pain and suffering. So, like, you lose a loved one and you grieve. There's nothing. I mean, that's a beneficial process and it's natural, but you don't have to hold on to the pain for your entire life. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I just wanted to make that point.
Hmm.
And what was your other question?
It was basically just, what do you want people to know? First thing that comes to your mind.
What do I want people to know? That they can that they probably have more power than they're aware of, and that they can create a beneficial future for themselves, even if the situation seems terrible or dark. Um, that there are solutions, and that you don't have to stay the same person that you are right now, and you don't have to live in the same reality that you've always lived in.
Thank you so much. I loved having you on to share your insights and your experience. Thank you so much for showing up and for lending your energy and your just who you are. It's really appreciated.
All right, Shannon, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure.